Welcome to Labor's View. This show is brought to you by the very hardworking and dedicated members of the Union Communications Workers of America, Local 1081. I'm David Weiner. I'm president of the union and host of Labor's View. Our members are employed by the Essex County Division of Welfare in non-supervisory positions. This evening we have as our guest, I believe for the third time.
Second.
Second? Okay. Ms. Diane Sare, who is running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District, which includes Bergen, North Passaic, North, something I can't read my handwriting, Warren, and Sussex.
Yeah.
So it's go west from us. Welcome to the show again.
Thank
you. I want to primarily speak about the foreclosure mortgage issue. We can, and we will. I know you'll manage to segue into different areas. We also state you are a candidate of the LaRouche Party.
Well, I'm a Democrat. I'm running in the Democratic Party primaries.
Okay, right.
But I am a LaRouche Democrat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which means what?
Well, which means that the policies of LaRouche over 40 years, which really are a continuation of what FDR represented, what Kennedy represented, not Wall Street bailouts, not endless wars like the Obama and Bush administrations, a policy of credit, what Alexander Hamilton understood in terms of a national bank, and that the money of it in and of itself has no intrinsic value, but that you're using your credit to build the future. And really, since the assassination of Kennedy and then Bobby Kennedy, we have had no leadership, no elected officials that I've heard who even think 3 hours into the future, let alone 50 years into the future.
Okay. Now, with the mortgage situation, most people realize that prior to the crash of 2008, which actually precipitated the crash of 2008, banks were lending money to people, giving mortgages to people that many people who could not afford them, shouldn't have had mortgages, and then subsequently, to make matters worse, bundled those mortgages and with others into financial instruments which they then sold in bulk to institutions such as labor pension funds. In our case, it would be the state pension fund, individual unions, retirement funds, all different types of organizations bought this toxic debt because they believed it was rated AAA by the rating agencies.
Right.
Okay. Do you have any background on that further?
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to say is that this goes back quite some time to the shutdown of our productive economy, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, being part of the labor movement. And what was done when Alan Greenspan came in, you remember there was a big crash of the markets, and he said, hold everything, and he invented derivatives, whereby you could place, in effect, a side bet on an actual company going bankrupt. And if you bet the right way, you would make a profit even if the company itself no longer existed or went out of business.
Right.
So you had this peculiar shift where the stock market would actually go up the more that the physical economy collapsed.
Well, the stock market's always been, in my term, perverse in my estimation, because if a company lays off a bunch of people, downsizes, their stock value actually goes up generally because they're deemed to have done something responsible from the bottom line point of view, not from the point of view necessarily of the people getting laid off and the ancillary effects, ill effects that would have upon the balance of society.
Well, it also shows you the fraud of statistics, because if you're running an auto plant and you fire a bunch of people, there's a bunch of automobiles already on the assembly line. So for a moment, it looks like your productivity per worker has increased when it actually hasn't. And that's how they come out with these crazy things. Oh, productivity is up by X. Well, that's because you just fired so many people, and you're going to pay for it later.
Right.
But what I would want to say is that this report, I don't know if you ever saw it, the financial crisis.
It's a little too thick for me. I like 200 pages.
It's a really amazingly easy read, and it's an official government inquiry chaired by Phil Angelides, the former treasurer of California, on what caused this crash. And to my surprise and Mr. LaRouche's surprise, it's truthful. it actually takes the human side of it. They start by saying, look, we have 26 million Americans who should be working, who are unemployed. We have 4 million households who have lost their homes. This had a real impact, and their view in this report is that none of the causes of this have yet been addressed because the regulations have not been reinstated. And what they describe in terms of this mortgage foreclosure crisis is that since they're always, the markets are trying to find ways to get new income streams, new forms of loot. So they said it was a novel idea to go into housing, where you're taking a commodity which is not a luxury item. You're taking what people live in, and you're turning it into a speculative instrument. And they and the way these things were done was unbelievable. I mean, there are horror stories of lending agencies finding migrant workers in Bakersfield, California, who can't even read English, saying, oh, I think you should have a $350,000 loan, having them sign on the dotted line. The people had no clue what they were getting into, but then these things were bundled and could be sold as a source of, you know, gambling on the
So-called
markets.
toxic investments. You know, going back just quickly to the issue of the derivatives, as you said, it was really betting against success.
Exactly.
It was betting that things would fail, and people made a lot of money in that regard. But the real perversity, I'm using that word twice now in a different form, is that the very banks that sold these products also bet against
Yes.
at the same time.
Yes, exactly. And that's what's coming out in the infamous case of Goldman Sachs, where
Right.
they were lying to their best clients, getting them to buy so that they could make a profit when they knew something was a bad investment.
And you just had 2 individuals resign rather publicly, which is unusual for any business because you usually don't want to burn your bridges.
Right.
I hope and assume these individuals made a good enough money to retire at this point, because they probably won't make it in that industry again based upon the fact that they just did what?
Well, hopefully they're resigning in order to avoid going to jail. I mean, I think the thing that's
You don't think it was
amazing-
altruistic just to out the
No.
excesses of Goldman Sachs?
No.
Oh.
No. I mean, what's amazing to me is really no one has gone to jail. I know when FDR came in, and he had a prosecutor who happened to be a Republican, a feisty Sicilian immigrant, Ferdinand Pecora, who was famous for his cigars. Mm-hmm. And what they did was they put Wall Street on trial in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and Banking Committee because they knew they could never get an honest trial because the judge and jury would get bought out by these people. And what FDR had to contend with is you had to destroy this aura of respectability because they were wearing their $1 million suits and they were going to run the policy of the United States, and he would never have been allowed to do the New Deal or the CCC or the Tennessee Valley Authority or anything if Wall Street had maintained that stranglehold. So he put Jack Morgan, the son of J.P. Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
went to jail. He served 6 months in prison for not paying taxes. And Pecora actually wrote a book called Wall Street Under Oath because he said, I'm afraid that the story will never be told. People are not going to know the truth of who caused the crash of 29. It was not like they say today, right? All the lazy people who don't want to work. That's why we're in this depression. Right. No, it was Wall Street. It was the richest.
Excessive speculation.
Yeah.
And buying on margin was the big
Right.
thing in those days.
Right.
You could buy something, put 10% up, and what wasn't that the number?
I don't know.
Something like that. But you put a certain fraction of the value up.
Right.
And you're able to, I guess, they just kept on selling and buying, and eventually the whole thing collapsed. It was a Ponzi scheme, in effect.
Yeah, exactly. Now, speaking of that, I was just reading in here this morning, apparently Fannie and Freddie
Mm-hmm.
had a leverage ratio of 75 to 1.
Wow. Because didn't they criticize one of the banks had a ratio of 40 to 1? They thought that was excessive.
Yeah.
75 to 1. And those were government, now they're semi-governmental entities, right?
It's all very murky.
Yeah, it's kind of like the post office. It's in this gray area. And housing is so important because most people, especially with the demise of traditional pension systems, you know, where you had a defined benefit, now it's defined contribution, difference being defined benefit, you would put away so much money, your employer would match it, whether it's public or private.
Right.
And then at a certain age you retire and you collect a portion based upon your salary. and that will go with you for life. Then Bush is the one really who pushed with the whole Social Security privatization, wanted to do defined contributions. So you put it into a 401k and take your best shot, which based on 2008, a lot of people lost a lot of money and didn't have the retirement. So houses for years, many years, have acted as kind of like a retirement investment, because when you got older, you sold it because you wanted to downsize, and you had that pot of money to either take with you, live on, and or to leave to your heirs. But now, how many houses are underwater, meaning that they're worth more than what the people are actually paying mortgage on.
Right, they're worth less than what people
are
paying.
Worth less than what they paid for initially, right? Thank you. So it's a very, very important issue, which leads me, I still can't get over this picture, which leads me, it's her campaign literature, to the subject that I'm very much involved, as a million things I'm involved with, but the fact that it's been found in at least 3 counties in 3 different states. One is, ironically, South Essex County, Massachusetts. Another one is North Carolina, and the other one, I believe, is in California, where, respectively, they found that a vast majority of the mortgages that were put on record are not valid. Vast majority are not valid. This guy, John O'Brien, is the registrar, even though it says registered. It's pronounced, I guess it's a British term, registrar. I know, I'm sorry about the British thing. I know LaRouche doesn't like the British. But this guy finds that they did an audit of the mortgages, and 16% of the mortgages were valid, 75% of the mortgages were invalid, and 27 of the invalid assignments are fraudulent, in that 35% are robo-signed and 10% violate fraud identity in that state. Robo-sign meaning what? Do you know? Do you know what robo-sign means? Robo-sign.
Not a person.
Right, it's
not a human.
Right. It's just a pen, doing it, and they also use fake names, as you were indicating. It happened in California.
Yeah.
So they found by these audits of the registrar, or some places it's county clerk's office, whoever handles the filing of mortgages, that they were improperly filed by these banks, so that technically these people that the banks are trying to foreclose upon, the banks really don't own the properties because they didn't file the necessary instruments, which adversely affects those counties additionally, not just those counties, all counties additionally, because that means the banks didn't pay the taxes on the certain instruments that they filed. They had to pay certain taxes. Those taxes weren't paid because it's an automated system called MERS, and it goes directly from the banks to the registrar, who apparently they don't have or didn't have the ability to detect this stuff going on.
Right. No, it's totally criminal. One of the things that this report goes through is there were lawsuits brought in 2006, 2007, first by the state of North Carolina, then by the state of Michigan against Wachovia Bank, because Wachovia was violating lending practices in those 2 states. They lost, but then they joined with attorneys general of all the states in the Union and Puerto Rico, and they brought a lawsuit against Wachovia Bank because the lending practices of the bank violated state law in every state in the Union. And this went before the Supreme Court in 2007, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-3 in favor of Wachovia Bank, saying the bank did not have to obey standard lending practices because it was under the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency.
As opposed to?
State law and federal law, lending.
So it was a venue issue. Rather than the propriety, judging the propriety of the actions, which I think most intelligent people would agree were improper, it's a technicality, basically. Yeah,
because the OCC was trying to figure out how do we flood the markets with liquidity. So phony mortgages are a good way to do this. You claim
OCC,
Office of the Comptroller of the Currency.
Okay.
Right, that's how they did it. And then the other thing, which I really loved, which shows just the sheer criminality of this, is they did an investigation in Florida between 2000 and 2007 10,500 new mortgage brokers were hired. Of them, 4,000 were hired who had criminal records.
Ah,
Of the ones with criminal records, 4,065 had been convicted of fraud, extortion. I mean, you imagine a recruiter with a clipboard
Sure.
standing outside the jail.
you're my
saying,
guy, right?
I mean, because who could do that? We met people when we were working on the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act back in 2007, which would have averted this crisis. We talked to a city council member, I think it was in Philadelphia, whose father had needed some extra cash, went to the bank. The father was 80 years old or something. The bank, instead of just giving him a small loan, signed him up for a 30-year mortgage at the age of 80.
Wishful thinking.
I mean, really criminal. And
Right.
and who would do that to an elderly person? What's the mindset?
Criminals.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Like the Enron people.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this also addresses this mustache question on my campaign literature, is take Moody's and Standard & Poor's. What did they do? They downgraded municipal bonds. They
Right.
downgraded municipal debt, forcing cities and school districts into speculative instruments.
Let me stop you there because so we can explain. Moody's, there are three basic ones, right? Three big ones. Moody's, I'm trying to think the other two.
Standard & Poor's.
Standard & Poor's, which downgraded the United States.
Yes.
And it's the
There's
third.
Fitch.
Fitch. Let's stop with those.
Yeah.
So those are the big ones. And so by downgrade, in other words, that their financial machinations were determined to be deficient to the extent that these rating agencies decided that they had, in effect, they're going to pay more money to borrow.
Right.
They're going to pay more interest to borrow because the higher a rating you have, the less you have to pay because you're considered a better bet.
Right.
Simply put.
Right. Right.
Okay. So you're saying that
That this was done at the same time.
to
that they
compel them to take riskier.
Yes. While they
investments.
were giving AAA ratings to all these crazy mortgage-backed
Right.
securities and all this garbage,
Which were garbage, right?
they were downgrading legitimate, functional water treatment systems, school boards, etc. You may have heard Birmingham, Alabama somehow owes, I forget what the figure was, but they were bankrupted because they were forced into speculative investments to pay for their water treatment system, and the thing went bad and they ended up owing, I forget, it was huge. The whole county was bankrupt. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I think ended up owing $2 billion, a school district. So you had, and then remember how this thing worked with the downgrading is they threatened the United States. They said, unless you can come up with $4 trillion in cuts, we are going to downgrade the United States. And this is
It's credit rating, right?
the U.S. credit rating. The U.S. has never been late on payments, never. In other words, there's no empirical reason, like when you're late on your credit card or whatever and they raise your interest rates. The United States had never done anything that would be considered, something that should be
warrants,
penalized.
right.
Exactly. So they threaten us, and then what happens is the Congress sort of buckles. So you have set up, Obama gets this financial control, this super Congress. Remember that? 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, the House and the Senate, who are tasked to figure out how to cut an additional $2.5 trillion. I think they came up with $1.5 trillion in cuts, and they have to come up with another $2.5 trillion. And there can be no debate. It's yay or nay. And they said if the Congress doesn't approve the cuts that they come up with, which include massive cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and defense was the third area,
Right.
that we will ram through a 2% cut across the board. And this is a dictatorship.
But it actually didn't happen.
No, because
They
they
didn't
all
come
fell
to an
apart.
agreement, right.
They couldn't come to an agreement, which is good for the American people. Like the 1930s, we elected Franklin Roosevelt. We didn't go fascist like the rest of Europe. And Americans definitely don't think both sides of the aisle. Look at how Paul Ryan had all these protests in his district on his cuts of Medicare and Social Security.
Proposed cuts. Right.
Yes, right.
In his bill.
Yeah.
Right.
Americans don't believe in fascism. And so Obama was unable to do this, but that is his mindset. And Senator Kerry, who has turned very rotten for some reason, you know, he's the one who, when we were bombing Libya without authorization of the Congress, Kerry worked with McCain to introduce a resolution saying you don't have to ask us, go ahead and bomb. I mean, he's really become rotten, and apparently he was the one in the commission saying, well, what we actually have to come up with is $10 trillion in cuts.
But the pressure, in all fairness, was coming from the Republican-controlled House in terms of making all these cuts. You can have all kinds of...
No, it's coming from Wall Street. And
well, yeah, but they control
London.
them through political donations.
Sure, but it's both parties. I mean, Obama is like the king of bailouts. They started under Paulson and Bush, and Obama in the Senate at that time was threatening other senators about what was going to happen.
As a senator?
Yes, as a senator, if they didn't go along with this, because he was going to become president, and sure enough, he did, and now we're up to $29 trillion.
Well, you know, we have this disagreement about Obama, especially your depictions here, but he bailed out or facilitated the bailout of the auto industry, which turned out to be a huge success. Do you disagree?
Yes.
You disagree.
I do disagree.
Somehow I figured you would. Okay. The major ones, particularly GM, which was always the biggest, for years was the biggest company in the world, they were ready to go under. Now, Republican presidential candidate Romney said at the time, let them go under, infamously said, let them go. They should have gone under?
The question, no, we had actually, LaRouche had written legislation and there was a number of congressmen supporting it. We thought the auto industry should have been retooled. See, what we bailed out was GMAC. We bailed out the financial wing.
That's the lending arm of General Motors.
Exactly.
Right.
We didn't save the plant and equipment. Most of this auto floor space is now being converted into condominiums across the country. And I remember in 2000...
Well, now we got housing.
Yeah, right.
Something
you go on eBay and they're selling this incredible state-of-the-art machine tools for a penny on the dollar, and I mean, it was horrible. It was horrible. Whereas, had you said, look, what we really need is high-speed rail. We really need a full-set economy. We need nuclear power. We need an energy-dense economy that can have electric rail, that can have, and you take these auto plants, which we know, the arsenal of democracy, they're very versatile. These people are highly skilled. They can be reorganized to produce anything. The locks and dams and levees on the Mississippi are all like 15 years past their life expectancy.
Well, for those who weren't around, I actually wasn't, I just missed it. Jerry, I think, was our producer. But the arsenal, meaning that during World War II, they were able to convert them very readily. In 41, they stopped making cars and just started making tanks and jeeps and other military vehicles and other armaments.
Right.
So they had that fluidity, but they did save the auto industry. It downsized. It did do a job on the unions in terms of pensions and stuff, but they did downsize, and they did turn it around to the effect that now the Americans are making money and building new plants, keeping people, putting new people to work, and are in good competition with people like Japan and others that have been, beating us copied us and then beat us for many, many years.
Well, but see, the problem is that people have the wrong standard. And back to this question of the assassinations of both Kennedys, is that people are not thinking of where we should be right now. In other words, the conditions that people are living in right now, the conditions of our infrastructure, the number of hours you have to work a week to make a decent wage, this is all insane. It's not a way for any civilized nation to be living. It's not fit for human beings. So the fact that New York City looks like, Baghdad in terms of the condition of the roads and things like that, or parts of Newark and so on, this is really unacceptable. And the irony is, if you were to take a fraction of what we spent on the bailout and invest...
Which bailout?
Of the
auto bailout?
Banks
bailout.
Of everything.
Because that was much larger.
Yes. I mean, as I said, the total is $29 trillion now between both administrations. Suppose you were to spend a few trillion on this giant water project we were discussing earlier, the North American Water and Power Alliance, the space program.
We were discussing before we came on the air, to make it clear, right?
Yes. What happens with these kind of things is you get a massive rate of return. For standard so-called infrastructure, they say it's about 6 to 1.
So you're talking about, to make it clear, since I know, and I had forgotten, because I forget everything, you're talking about pumping water from Alaska into the United States, to arid areas such as Las Vegas, California, because the Colorado River is...
Yeah, all the way down to Arizona, the whole Great American Desert. In fact, the original plan, because at the time it was designed in the 60s, you were having terrible problems with the Great Lakes region.
Right.
So there's canals in Canada you would connect up. You could bring fresh water flowing through the Great Lakes, clean out a lot of the pollution there. I mean, it's just vast. It would involve about 33 states.
Did you know that there's huge deposits of salt being mined underneath the Great Lakes?
No.
Yeah, I saw it on one of those Discovery
Really?
channels. Amazing. It starts
amazing.
It goes all the way to Detroit, and it's just millions of tons of salt. And you have these guys underneath the water in these mines mining salt. I think it's fascinating.
No, it is. We apparently know less about the Earth in terms of going down, like what our crust is actually made of, than we know about outer space. I mean, people have all these theories, but no one's been able to actually... I think the Russians tried, and they got a drill. I forgot how far down it went, and then it got too hot, and they couldn't.
But they just hit
do
it
anymore.
where they digress. But it's fascinating digression. They just did a fascinating success. The Russians did after many, many years. I think 30 years of drilling in the Antarctic. They found this lake, huge lake underneath, and they've actually reached it. There have been other lakes, but they reached it. And now they're talking about life forms that could be ancient. It is fascinating. There is good stuff. We only have a couple of minutes. Okay. Let's talk about your campaign and what's going on.
Well, it's wide open. I told the Democratic Party, I'm on fairly good terms, at least with most of them in my district, because of my various outspoken activities against Governor Christie and so on.
I knew there was something about you I liked. Okay.
That I was not going to seek their endorsement because I cannot support Obama. That being said, the party is in such a shambles because of their commitment to Obama that they could not really find anyone to run. They were trying to get Harry Carson, then they were trying to get Jim
football
McQueen.
Player, right? The former football player.
And of course, the original plan was to get Rothman to run in that district, which I don't think he would win. He's very close to Obama, and it is still, even with the redistricting, it's like 51 or 2% Republican.
That would be against Garrett, who's extremely conservative.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Extreme.
So Rothman's running against Pascrell.
Correct.
Two
incumbent Democrats running against each other. So there's no incumbent Democrat in my district. I'm running in the primary. There's 3 of us right now. There's Adam Gusson, the deputy mayor of Teaneck, and there's Jason Castle, who's a 30-year-old African-American Marine who does not live in the district. He's moving into the district to run. And you can see they were just basically trying to find somebody, because after the McQueenie thing didn't work out.
McQueenie being a broadcaster on, I think, Channel 12 of political stuff. It's a piece of political for many, many years.
Yeah, and I think there may have been some financial issue, because it started coming out in the press that he had a PAC and he'd given it $45,000, and the PAC had given $9,000 to Garrett. And
it's very embarrassing.
So
you're running, and
I am the only serious candidate. I mean, the other candidates...
As long as you lack an ego, that's fine. You're the only serious candidate. That's good.
Well, they don't have a policy. I mean, I'm running because we have to save the nation. We have to get our country back in the idea of what Kennedy, FDR, Lincoln, the American system of economics. It's life and death. And Garrett, of course, is a complete disaster. I mean,
that we can agree on.
Would not support Glass-Steagall. He also doesn't think Obama should be impeached, so he and the Democrats agree on that.
That we can agree on. Well, let's leave it on we agree and disagree.
Yes.
And I want to thank you again, Diane Sare, for joining us on our show. And we want to thank you for joining us on Labor's View. I'm David Weiner, the host and president of Local 1081 Communication Workers of America, and we hope to see you on future shows.